today we are reading What Was the March on Washington, Chapter 4 to Chapter 7. We are reading basically 3 chapters. I hope you like and subscribe. Chapter 4. No detail too small. Bayard Rustin had only 2 months to plan what was intended to be the largest peaceful demonstration in American history. His job was to organize a protest on a gigantic scale, without cell phones, computers, the internet, or much of the technology we take for granted today. Within days, he had a tentative plan and a core staff of volunteers. They would be in charge of other volunteers around the country. Both his small office in Washington and the main headquarters in the New York City neighborhood of Harlem received bomb threats every day. Rustin doodled on his yellow legal pad, his brain going a mile a minute. Within 2 weeks, he had a manual and sent it to 2,000 leaders, white and black. It laid detailed groundwork for getting a huge turnout on such short notice. It was a call of action, setting up transportation and committees, ways to make the march known, and ways to raise funds. It called for captains aboard every bus, train, and plane. The march was going to cost $135,000. His staff went after donations from churches, organizations, and individuals. They raised about 2/3 of the money this way. They also sold souvenirs, many thousands of buttons showing a black hand and a white hand clasped together. They held fundraising concerts or hootenies with folk singers like Joan Baez and a new gravel voice singer named Bob Dylan. Rustin worked as if he were putting together a huge ad campaign for a new product. The flyers his team mailed out began with the words, "An appeal to you." They sent as many as 100,000 a day, with local phone numbers to call to sign up. There were spots on radios and TV, internet, on TV talk shows, newspaper and magazine ads, concerts and rallies. Rustin contracted Hollywood celebrities who used their star power to get out the word. The day chosen for the march was a Wednesday. It needed to be on a weekday. Why? Church groups were planning to come in big numbers, but church groups wouldn't skip their Sunday services. Reverend Abraham Woods said, "If we didn't have the crowd, it would be perceived that we would funk." Rustin's organizers went to all the major cities to work closely with local leaders to do the hard work of signing up marches and getting them to Washington. In all, some 1,500 groups across the country helped. How to get all those people to the capital? Cars were discouraged as parking would be limited, so Rustin's team began lining up enough buses and trains. How would they keep people comfortable? Memos advised marchers to wear low-heeled shoes and to each bring sunglasses, a hat, and a raincoat. Marchers could bring portable stools and hundreds of folding chairs, where to be supplies to the elderly. What about food? It was okay to bring picnic baskets, box lunches, and thermo bottles of water, but no alcohol. The recommended sandwich was peanut butter and jelly. Sandwiches with mayo were not good. They could go bad in the heat. Churches were encouraged to donate lunches. One New York church packed up 80,000 cheese sandwiches, apples, and slices of marble cake. Hot dogs and other foods would be sold with large coolers of soda donated by the Coca-Cola Company. Some 20 portable drinking fountains were rented, bathrooms, and first aid. Rustin arranged for nearly 300
300 portable Johnny on the spot toilets. He planned to set up 22 first aid stations with 40 doctors and 80 nurses on hand. What route should the marchers take? They were not going to pass the Congress on Capitol Hill or the White House. This was a march about freedoms, not politics. Instead, they would walk along the National Mall between two landmarks from the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial. These monuments were connected by a reflective pool almost a half-mile long and a vast lawn. From the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, speakers would address the crowd. Rustin planned an attention of inspiring speeches by hand-picked speakers. He soothed the egos of those not chosen. Speeches had to be approved in advance and could last no longer than 5 minutes. Rustin wanted the best sound system available, so the speaker's voice would carry clearly for 1 square mile. Otherwise, the crowd wouldn't pay attention. Along the mall, miles of wires were laid to carry telephone, television, and radio lines. A big concern was how to keep marchers safe. Rustin worked with Washington's police chief. A vast security force was on standby: 8,900 policemen, firemen, National Guard, and Army members, and Marines in case of a riot. They were armed with guns, clubs, and toxic tear gas. 30 helicopters were also on standby, sent to Washington from Fort Bragg. Washington's main hospital had a disaster plan ready. In addition, Rustin assembled a team of unarmed marshals. They were taught how to control a crowd without force. Also, there would be leaders on every bus to explain to passengers what to do if someone insulted or hit him. They would ignore it and not fight back. They should leave it to the marshals to respond. There were to be no acts of civil disobedience that could lead to arrest. Over 500 cameramen, technicians, and reporters were to be on hand with more cameras than that filmed the last presidential inauguration. For a month, the president remained silent about the historic events about to take place in the Capitol. Finally, on July 17, President Kennedy spoke at a press conference in support of the march. Later, he declined to speak at it, but he agreed to meet with the leaders that way. By mid-August, there were no more buses available to rent on the East Coast. All scheduled planes, trains, and buses were filled to capacity. The mall was filled with sounds of carpenters hammering nails into the speakers. Platform on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Then, on the night before, someone damaged the sound system. Luckily, U.S. Army sound engineers were able to fix it, working through the night. Up to this hotel room, Martin Luther King Jr. also worked all through the night on his speech. The question was, how many people would show up to hear it? Chapter 5. A crowd gathers and gathers. At 6 a.m. on the big day, reporters hassled Bayard Rustin, wanting to know where the marchers were. He looked down at his yellow legal pad and assured them, "Gentlemen, everything is going exactly according to plan." The aide next to him could see that the paper was blank. It was dark when the first bus came. 38 high-energy students from Mississippi got off. Trains started arriving at 7:25. One of them had 800 teenagers on board. There were rumors that local residents were sitting on their porches with loaded guns. "People were afraid," said one witness. "We didn't know what we would meet." In fact, many residents had left the city fearing riots. Fewer than half of the government workers in the city showed up to their jobs that Wednesday. By mid-morning, the train was pulling into Union Station every 10 minutes. Every hour, 100 buses passed through the Baltimore Harbor Tunnel on the way to D.C. Chatting quietly, throngs of people surged towards the Washington Monument. They picked up signs and programs that listed the speakers. They brought buttons that said, "I was there." As the crowd around the monument grew larger, a program of music began at 10 a.m. John Bayes crooned, "Oh, freedom and all my trials will soon be over." The most popular protest singers of the day were on hand: Odita Dos, White, Bob Dylan, and Peter Moore and Mary. The songs were also approved in advance by Rustin. All were peaceful folk music, ballads about courage. Peter, Paul, and Mary sang "Blowing in the Wind" and "If I Had a Hammer." One famous African-American entertainer, Josephine Baker, had flown in from France. She told everyone, "You can't go wrong. The world is behind you." The first black airline steward took the microphone. It was Ruth Carol Taylor, who, in response to racist insult, she urged everyone to shout freedom over and over so it could be heard all over the world. Glamorous singer Lena Horne later shouted the same word, stretching it out over 5 seconds. A young witness reported where there had been tension before I got on the bus. The business in my body settled. I became so peaceful, people were crying. At 10:30, an announcement came over the loudspeaker. 90,000 people were now gathered. The crowd cheered. And still trains and buses kept steaming in. A caravan of 450 buses arrived from Harlem. Other buses came from Chicago, Baltimore, Boston, Detroit, and Birmingham. All the major cities in the U.S. Some small towns sent a single bus, in all more than 2,000 buses. 40 trains, 10 chartered planes, and countless cars were en route to Washington. Baseball hero Jackie Robinson was there with his family, as well as Rosa Parks and other heroes of the civil rights movement. At one point, 10,000 more people were arriving every 10 to 15 minutes. The green of the mausoleum was vanishing under the feet of a massive crowd. Everyone was friendly, sharing, caring, singing, and laughing, a 13-year-old remembered. Estimates vary, but most put the count count as an astounding 250 to 300,000 people. It was about 70% black and 30% white. This meant about 75,000 white marchers were there. The march leaders were glad about that. One 15-year-old marcher said, "I was so happy to see that in the white people, that they could listen and take in and respect and believe in the words of a black person. I had never seen anything like that." Another person said, "I was awestruck by the multicolored faces of the marchers. Their dedication, their sincerity, their somberness, and their unspoken resolve to make a difference." At 11:30, the 10 leaders of the march were to walk at the head of the crowd to be the Lincoln Memorial. But as the time drew near, the leaders were nowhere to be seen. They were struck in meetings on Capitol Hill. Eager marchers didn't want to wait, so they started off early, led by a high school marching band in bright yellow jackets. Rustin almost panicked. He tried to hold people back without success. Quickly, the civil rights leaders were rushed to the scene. Aides made a break in the crowds, all for the leaders so they could pose as if they were at the very front. Roy Wilkins on the NAACP looked around at the sea of people and said, "This is the king of all marchers." Chapter 6. Millions of Footsteps. The marchers headed down Constitution and Independence Avenues towards the Lincoln Memorial, 1 mile away. Constitution Avenue is awash with a human river, a marcher named Edward Morgan said when describing the scene later, with chimes of freedom now bobbing like sailboats above the marchers' heads. This wasn't a parade. The crowd did not march in straight lines, and few people watched from the sidelines. Marchers stayed in groups as many as 30 abreast. Some smiled, others were crying. Most had serious looks on their faces. Sometimes, all of a sudden, people started chanting chants like, "Jancy Crow must go," some sang, but often the sound of footsteps were heard. Many were ordinary people dressed in their Sunday best. Some had never been to D.C. before and were awestruck. It was like coming into Rome. With all those marble buildings, said a man from New Jersey. 1 foot forward, another foot forward. Was anyone scared? Of course. There was a real feeling of excitement mixed with anxiety in the air, said the marcher. There was the feeling that anything could happen to you at any time. But there was no violence. All police had to do was help people find lost friends and direct vehicles to parking places. The KKK's Imperial Grand Wizard had vowed to show up, but he had plane trouble and never arrived. The head of the American Nazi Party had planned to bring in 10,000 followers to disrupt the march. He showed up with only a very small group. One of the men was arrested for giving a speech, a hate-filled speech, without a permit, and the Nazi Party members left. Most of the crowd was unaware of the incident. A minister described the mobs as "you're here, really, really happy." The march was turning on to be what everyone had wished for. By 2:30, everyone had reached the Lincoln Memorial. For many, that 1 mile walk was the most important journey of their lives. Before the speeches, there was a music. An organist started off with the Battle Hymn of the Republic, a song from the Civil War days. "We Shall Overcome" was the second song based on an old hymn about peace and justice. It was made famous by folk singer Pete Seeger. People would join hands while singing and make up new verses such as, "We are not afraid." The day got hotter. The temperature rose to 87 degrees. Roasting in the sun, some fanned themselves with their programs or dipped their bare feet into the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. Lines for toilets and for food were hundreds of people along. A few fainted from the heat and some were brought to first aid stations. These people were lifted above the packed crowd and passed from person to person. By the end of the day, the Red Cross treated a total of 1,355 people. Just one person died. It was from a heart attack. Sunlight glinted on the pool, shooting reflections everywhere. 250,000 people now waited to hear words that would express why they had come to Washington. Thank you everyone for watching. What was the March on Washington, Chapter 4 to Chapter 6. I hope you like it. Like and subscribe. All the normal things that Mr. Beast does, I'm just checking.